Hello, today I want to talk a little bit about Mech Engineer, a game I played for less than 1 hour, so it's going to be another sort of here's why I didn't think I should keep playing this game sort of first impressions videos. But really, the reason I wanted to talk about things in Mech Engineer is that it raises topic questions that will be fun to rant about, I think. Well, let's see what I mean as we go on. Mech Engineer is a game that has a real roller coaster of a first 5 minutes, and I think it's really to the game's detriment, and hopefully I can expand on that within the next 5 minutes. So here's the first challenge, I guess, of the game. This is what pops up when you run the game, some kind of menu. There's one thing I can't find here, a new game button, so that's what I'm poking around trying to get happening here. It turns out that if you click on the load game thing on an empty slot, that is effectively the new game menu. So perhaps a minor UX concern there. Luckily it didn't hold me up for more than a minute. Well, minor UX concerns are going to be the bread and butter of the average Mech Engineer experience, but we'll get to that. It starts off with this really cool premise, I thought, delivered in a stylish way, and I'm like, so far, so good. It's Future Devin back at it again, because I cut down my rant because it was too long, but I accidentally cut out the part talking about the premise, so here's the premise. Earth has been taken over by aliens. There's only one city left. The city can walk around for some reason, but more to the point, you have to deploy giant fighting mechs to defeat the aliens as you quest around trying to do something or other. It's really sort of miserable and everyone's gonna die. It's this like biological, I have no mouth but I must scream, situation. And well, that's about that. The main point of this video is that I had a mental breakdown at the most minor UI inconveniences, and I'm just trying to justify that to myself and to the world. So let's go back to that. But then it pops to this Sim Earth looking UI, and I'm like, uh-oh, it's happening again. Like a UI overload is about to happen. I'm about to not understand a video game. I've been here before. So my initial experience was to click on some things. There was something flashing in the corner. Turns out to be some kind of tech tree. What's happening here? This is the peak of the roller coaster. In the in-game manual, I guess, which you can open up within the UI, it's explaining what to do. And you might have seen the very first line of this book is, here's a book on how to work with this interface. It doesn't say like, here's how to play the game. It's a book about using the interface. And I was like, okay, so the interface is part of the game. They're going to do this thing where like some parts of the UI won't work and there'll be actual gameplay elements to make the UI work, because you're supposed to be operating this low technology, dark sci-fi future computer stuff, and that will be part of the game. That's what I really hoped for upon seeing that setup. It's not what it's doing. It's just a manual that doesn't cover many things. And I was like, oh, it doesn't cover things because it's part of the mystery. And to the fact the game isn't onboarding me at all, and is giving me the opportunity to look these things up, it's going to be part of the experience. The intended experience will be for things to not work and you're supposed to work it out. And I guess it is like that, but in not a gamified way, in more of a practical way, in that you actually are supposed to be playing the game with understandings of how it works, and this book thing is given as a sort of stopgap, as an alternative to an in-game tutorial. It gives you this book and it's like, well, maybe that will do. But there's no gamification of that. It's not really part of the game that using the UI is hard. It just is hard, and here's how to use it anyway, because once you know how it works, it probably won't come across as hard, and that will be the developer's point of view, I expect. But the question is it good that it's hard? And I think different people will have different views on that, because from my perspective, not really knowing what's going on as I'm poking about here doesn't help me. Because, well, of this sort of initial beginner experience consideration, which I saw some people recently arguing against in some other context, saying like you shouldn't cater to beginners because it ruins the game for everyone else. And I just think, well, does it though? Because everyone else essentially already has the knowledge that the beginners are asking for. So if you were giving it to the beginners and bringing them up to your level, what are you losing? It depends, really. This is a very broad topic we're getting into that kind of applies to Mech Engineer. Maybe I'll rant about it more. Well, you might have seen stuff's flashing up all over the place. Something was saying the city is under attack. You have to deploy your mechs to do something about it. And I was sort of poking about trying to work out what it meant for me to do with that. And I ended up in this menu where you can make some kind of mech. And I thought, well, maybe this is what it means. Basically, the game's called Mech Engineer, and you can design and customize mechs by putting parts on them from these lists of parts you have available, and you have this big economy in the background where you're running a city, and the purpose, I suppose, is to get the correct parts. That tech tree will unlock new parts, you get the resources to make the parts, to make more powerful mechs, to do something or other, as we'll see. There was one more challenging part to put in my mech, which was the reactor core, where it was saying something like you must put it on the construction table and do something to ignite it. So I can actually use the book here, and this was kind of funky, like opening the book, almost simulating like somebody at an actual table with a book, like trying to work out how do I turn on the reactor. And it turns out to be easy enough. You just jam tons of cooling things in it until it looks like it won't melt down if you turn it on. And indeed, you actually don't have to do that at the start of the game, as it turns out, because you already have a bunch of pre-made mechs in this hangar area. So I ended up making more mechs that I don't need. Here's what the game was actually asking me to do. Put pilots in the mechs. You start off with a list of pilots who have various stats. I'm not quite sure like the significance of these stats, having not really played anything, but I just put some of them in some of the mechs. Well, we're going into another unstructured part of the OFFD Rant video where I'm just going to dump here some footage of me trying to work out what to do next. So I know I'm supposed to be fighting something. Enemies are approaching the city, the game is telling me. And I can bring up that little screen there, which sort of had some priority target listings on it, and I was like, okay, yeah, just target whatever. How do I actually do it? I went to the book, and it didn't really help me out very much, and basically, after a few minutes, you'll see me discover how to start a battle. And this is the sort of UX consideration where it's like, is it an intentional part of the game that you shouldn't know how to start a battle? Is it part of the fundamental experience of the game to not really know what's going on? And to some people they will say yes, and they would say it is bad for the game to be like, you know, like in Hive Fleet or something, which I showed recently, where it also has a weird UI, but a guy would come and point at the button you're supposed to press at a given moment and say, press that button to go and do a battle, do this to deploy your mechs. Because this game doesn't do that, I don't know, it forces me to spend a couple of minutes trying to work out what's going on because it has a non-standard UI. And the developers or the haters might say, you are not permitted to complain about that because that is the game. And if it wasn't there, I, quote unquote, the person arguing against me, would lose something. Therefore, like, I can't permit you to let the game show you how to start a mission because I like it that it doesn't show you how to start a mission. They will say something along the lines of, it's not holding my hand. They will imply they feel respected by the notion that the game isn't really telling them how to play it, and they'll feel like, well, it's respecting my intelligence by presuming that I will go out of my way to learn this. And indeed, like, you could easily learn the UI to Mech Engineer. If you were willing to put in like less than an hour of research, all of the problems I had with Mech Engineer probably wouldn't exist, and instead I'd be talking about the game, like we're not even really going to get into the game in this video. In a second, I'll explain why I think that people saying, well, just do that then, isn't the answer to this problem, and why I sort of divert the blame elsewhere. Also though, I wanted to consider the possibility that it being difficult to get into can be good for other reasons. So people will sort of be dismissing it and just saying, well, it's hard to get into, but you can look it up to overcome that problem. But there is another angle on this. What if you weren't supposed to be looking up how to overcome it? What if you've made a mistake there? What if the difficult experience is part of the experience? What if the challenge is the point? They could plausibly be doing something where they want players to not really be able to get into it, to create that atmosphere of discomfort and mystery, which the rest of the game is certainly building up as well, or even to simulate something like the player's character not really knowing how to use this computer in-universe. Therefore, the player shouldn't know how to use it. This is a very reachy kind of argument I'm making right here. I'm just sort of putting it forward for food for thought, really. I'm pretty sure they're not doing that because they would essentially have to tell you they're doing that so that you don't go and look up the answers, because that would spoil it. So, as you'll see later, people's defense of the bad UX is ultimately, you can learn it by trial and error, and you can look it up, and there's a sort of sense of, well, you damn kids, too lazy to look it up. And it's something I've been hit with myself many times, on this very channel in fact, where I'd talk about some negative experience I had in a game and people will say, well, if only you knew this, this and this. I think X4 was a good example of this. You would have had a different experience. Therefore, you can't say that your experience with the game was bad because you did something or didn't do something to cause that bad experience. It's not the game's fault. That's the thesis being put forward. And I always try to resist this. I see it completely differently because if there is something you need to know to make the game fun, I do think it's the game's responsibility to give it to you, unless they're doing some arty thing where not giving to you is part of the fun in some way, but I don't actually think that applies to Mech Engineer here. So when a game has an issue that can be overcome by player knowledge and experience, with UI use being a great example of that of course, you can put that on the player. You can say, well, it's your fault for not already knowing it. But take it one step further. Whose fault is it that they don't know it? Well, the developers ultimately had control of that flow of information. And I guess it annoys me to see the solution to problems like that being phrased as just like, well, look it up somewhere. Like, just try to find it out. Do research before you make a video on it, man. Something like that. Because I think, well, what I'm asking for is the thing you're asking me to do, but I am quote-unquote entitled to having it be done for me by someone else. That's what I'm claiming, and I'm complaining that it wasn't done. In the same way that you're complaining that it wasn't done by me, I'm complaining it wasn't done by the person I paid to do it, in my view. And that's where I'm using the phrase entitlement, but what I mean is like a non-pejorative version of this. So when I come into Mech Engineer, am I entitled to know how to start the missions when it says start a mission? My answer is yes. So when I complain saying it's too hard to start a mission, by hard I mean sort of annoying, like it's not obvious how to do it, and because it took me 3 minutes and I wanted it to take me 3 seconds, this is a legitimate grievance, and my only hesitance is that I think people will say that isn't a legitimate grievance. And I guess it's not a big deal after the fact. It's a real sort of beginner experience focused thing, where if you already know how to do it, it's probably really hard to sympathize with somebody who doesn't know how to do it and how annoying it is, and how it contributes to the first impression of the game in a negative way. And I can only just sort of stand here and be like, well, it's deliberately like that. Is that a good thing? Is that something to be proud of? Is it really worth going for a sort of theme? Like the game's theme is it's hard to use the UI. That's the most interesting question that Mech Engineer raised for me. You might note I'm not talking about the game because I think this is more interesting, this concept. So like, what is the potential upside of it being hard? Is there an upside to me having to spend 3 minutes to start the mission here? Well, maybe there is. And it's kind of a difference here between first impressions and later impressions. That's going to cause an issue. Because if the game is hard to learn, it's inevitably going to get bad first impressions, but later on, you will inevitably forget those bad first impressions, because once you know how to do everything, it just stops being an issue. So we have to compare what you get, that being a sense of achievement, I suppose, of overcoming a difficult-to-use system, versus the actual difficulty and the negative feelings coming from that difficulty. And by difficulty, I kind of just mean confusion again. I don't want to conflate this with some sort of gameplay challenge, because I'm trying to emphasize how it isn't gameplay, really. It's not a hard thing to do, it's an easy thing to do in a different language. Like, it's an easy thing to do where once you have the 2 seconds of education required to do it, it's trivial. It's only that the game didn't give you that 2 seconds of education. And the argument is, should they just give it to you? Should they just let you know? Or is it really worth taking that hit early on, and then later people will get this possibly incorrect and sort of invented in their own mind sense that they have overcome some great challenge because they were never told how to use it, but they managed to work it out anyway. And I think that's the kind of gameplay experience that people value when they go into games being like, yes, it doesn't hold my hand, like, I'm able to do this myself. And I'm like, well, here I am, look at me, the uber gamer, who worked out how to play the game slightly on my own. Do I feel some sort of sense of achievement? Not really. I just thought it was stupid. I eventually did something, discovered it was really easy, and felt like an idiot for not knowing how to do it already. Like, that's sort of my perspective on it. And that's why I feel that a lack of tutorialization, a lack of onboarding, a lack of catering to beginners, a lack of hand-holding, or any other keywords you like to mention does actually make things worse. I think the sense of achievement you get from not having those things can be entirely illusory, in particular when the stuff doesn't really concern gameplay activities or decision-making on the part of the player, and this game is a big example of that. That's why I'm bringing this to the fore. One other brief thing to mention before I stop ranting here is that I did actually dislike the game from a purely taste point of view, which is that I didn't like the miserable aspect of it. So this is completely separate to everything else I was just ranting about, but I wanted to add this in. One of my first impressions of the game was that I didn't like how miserable it was. The way everything's grey and sad and there's no hope, things like that. It's a game that sort of just says, well, here's a terrible world that's doomed to failure. Do you want to play in this world? And I'm kind of like, no, I just got done with work. Can't we just do something else? Like, that's essentially my view. A very shallow view this time. I can't justify saying that the game is automatically bad for having a negative themed aesthetic, but for me it is. So there's that comment for what it's worth. There's no getting around that really. That's just me clashing with the vision of the developers in a way that doesn't really brook any criticism. It's not like, well, it's objectively bad. Whereas you could argue that the UI being kind of annoying is more objectively bad, because I guess I don't consider UI navigation to be gameplay, therefore it shouldn't really be a matter of taste. Your goal is to let the players do the thing they're trying to do with minimal interference. And that goal is not achieved in this game, clearly. It was maximally interfering with my ability to play the game. And I only hold off calling this like a damning problem, as some others have done, because I like to be really pretentious and open-minded to the idea that it being bad can be something that's good. Like, it can be artistic, or it can be part of an experience where, as I said, the sort of negativity it imbues into you early on is part of what strengthens the positivity that comes later from overcoming it. And it's possible that bad UX can be part of that. It's sort of analogous to well, I've made this art gallery of paintings, but the real art is that I've locked the door and I don't let anyone in. And it's like, okay, but in that case you can't really be expected to be praised for the paintings. I don't think you necessarily shouldn't be allowed to do that. That's a thing you can do, but you have to accept all of the criticism that comes with it and just try not to be mad about it. And I'm only saying all this because I know some people will say, they'll get mad at my madness here. They'll say you should not be mad that the game is doing this thing, that the game has locked the doors, because that's part of it. I enjoyed the fact I had to break in through the windows and get to go and see the paintings, and I feel better for it. But then I just don't sympathize, because in this analogy I'm like, well, the point of me coming to this art gallery was to appreciate the art. I already know I can break windows. I didn't want to have to do that today. I came to do something else, so it wouldn't be interesting to me to break a window and then go and do the something else. Couldn't I have just done it? So that's the UX analogy here to not being able to get to grips with this game because it's not telling me what I need to know. And the sort of grand outcome of all this is basically nothing. I think that's another key point to hit on here, because people will be like, what are you proposing? You're taking this game away from me. You want to dumb it down? You want the game to just tell you what to do? Literally, we're talking about adding one line of text to the game when it's when it tells you you're under attack, it goes, oh, click here to open the battle screen. On the battle screen, there's a line of text that says, drag 4 mechs into here to deploy them. Because that's what the designers want you to do in the game. But do they want you to not know it? That's a question. And these were the things I was thinking about playing Mech Engineer. Well, I guess while I was playing, I was probably also thinking, what am I doing? What's going on? What even is this game? Many questions I'm sure you in the audience have, and I wonder what the developers would think about you having those questions. If you haven't seen this game and you're just looking at this with me here, I doubt you know what's going on. Because, well, you're not supposed to, I guess. Maybe that's a good thing, but somebody would complain about you not knowing what's going on, and I think that's a bad thing, and maybe that's what I'm trying to get at in some way here. There's a meme, I think, which applies here, to those haters, as I put it, which is that picture of like some sheep where it's like, damn dude, you had trouble learning something when doing it for the first time. I forget what it is. Put it on the screen, future Devin, and that's my reaction to some stuff we'll see later, actually. I don't know why I'm saying this now, because I was going to cover this later. My out of control rants are indeed out of control. Let's go back into the structured section and talk about some actual gameplay now. What are we even doing in Mech Engineer? I'm so glad you asked. It's the next day, Devin, who's already forgotten what it was I was talking about yesterday. It was something stupid, wasn't it? I actually had an idea that kind of overwrites all the stuff I was talking about yesterday. Maybe I'll throw that in later. So for now, what we're doing is we're trying to move a city about the world. But in order to move into a square on the map there, you have to first capture the square, and that's where the battle system comes in. So I presume you can only deploy next to the city, and then you capture an area, move into it, your goal being to move to certain places, to collect certain things, to escape the planet, I believe. I think that might be the ultimate goal, or maybe save the planet, or something. You can see certain places are highlighted as being of significance on the map. We want to go towards them. One of them is 2 squares to my right. I'm going to try and move 2 squares to the right. So there we go, we've got the game objective. Now let's play the game. We've got through the quote-unquote game of knowing how to deploy into battle, so we'll skip over that. That only took me half an hour to rant about. Now let's actually look at what happens when you do a battle. I guess this is quote-unquote the game. This is the make or break part, where you have to do something or other in these fights. And there you go, that's my analysis. We'll go deeper into that in a second. The first thing to mention is that as it says here, or as you can see here, I should say, it actually tells you the controls on the map in here, and what I wanted to say very facetiously is to go to the people who hate the fact that games handhold and are complimenting this game for not handholding and be like, well, what do you think about that? That's about as handholdy as it gets, writing the controls into the environment so you always have to look at them. Aren't you annoyed by that? Why is nobody giving this a negative review because it told them the controls? I'm saying this because I think secretly, had it told you how to play in other instances, you actually would have been fine with it, and you probably wouldn't have thought anything less, and the claim that the game is improved by not telling you how to play it probably don't really hold out. Like, this wouldn't have happened in the alternate universe where it just did tell you. You wouldn't have been disappointed by that, I suspect. Anyway, this is my accusation. That aside, let's try and once again say what's happening on the screen. Well, how much can we say about this? You are the 4 mechs walking about this area, shooting at something or other. You can see there's a mini-map in the bottom right, and we're shooting at the red parts on it, which are off-screen. You are limited in your zoom levels, a classic gaming problem, and it's rearing its head here once again. So you can't really see what your characters can see. They're firing at things off the screen. It's a shame, but more importantly, we're being attacked by a tornado, I think anyway. We're being attacked by some dots that are swirling around. And I'm trying to give my guys orders to get out of the way, and one feature of the game is that your mechs don't always follow your orders. The pilots are kind of uppity, and it's tracking somewhere, I seem to recall, like how disobedient they are and how much time they spend in battles not following your orders. So that's a way in which the game limits your control of what happens, which, well, it's a dangerous game to play, essentially, in terms of game design, limiting player control, especially over critical things, because it limits the extent to which the game is a game. Like, it's a very fundamental blow to take. And it's something that players almost always don't like, so you have to be really sure it's a good idea to not be in control. It might be more realistic or immersive to not be fully in control. But again, you're taking a hit to achieve that, and you just have to recognize that. And, well, speaking of being not in control, the game is actually playing itself right now. I described it as an auto-battler to some extent earlier. This is because, as it's constantly saying on the screen, if you double-click the left mouse button, the game goes into AI control mode and it just plays itself and you just watch. And when it's in that mode, your mechs will do whatever the objective of the battle is, and you might note that while it spent a lot of time telling you the controls, it doesn't spend any time telling you what you're supposed to do. I don't know, maybe that's how it's not holding your hand, like it told you how to move the mechs but didn't tell you where to move them or why you're supposed to be doing anything at all. Well, we'll see me discovering what you're supposed to be doing later. Luckily, because the battles are AI controlled, the AI did whatever it was we were supposed to be doing in that fight, and it just sort of cuts out and you win. It's very weird because it cuts out like mid-fight. You complete a victory objective and it doesn't so much as say that you've won. It just cuts back to this menu and it's like, you didn't die. So I guess we did the thing, and that was that, and here's me using this neat save menu, because I was totally done with this. This is footage, well this actually isn't footage from the next day, but the next day I came to play Mech Engineer, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was so already stressed out and miserable. I was like, I just don't want to have to deal with Mech Engineer's bullshit anymore. So this is what I did, represented by this footage. I played the worst platforming gameplay you'll ever find, which is that of the Final Fantasy XIV mini-games. And I was here because it's colourful and it's kind of, I don't know, consequenceless, and I kind of knew what to do as well. You can see my character's wearing a kind of purple hoodie there. I won that the day I was playing this session of Mech Engineer. So we cut away from the pretty colours, from baby mode, back to here where I'm trying to work out what that means up at the top left. I've got these items that I'm supposedly building, but they've all got these lines through them, as if they're not being built. The only point to make here is that it's not obvious what it's talking about, or I guess in the grander sense, why I should care about these numbers or what I'm supposed to do with this information. That's the sort of thing you are supposed to learn through experience, or, as some would say, you're supposed to learn from a walkthrough or reading a manual, or just generally getting that much avoided hand-holding from somebody else so that you don't feel like Big Daddy game developer held your hand or something. I'm still mad about that apparently, and we'll get back to that again. So we forced our way back into the game. What do I need to do? I need to move to the right again. Curiously, the city icon that used to be there isn't there anymore. I think it's because there are various map overlays, and, or maybe it's just because when you're looking at areas around your town, it shows this number instead of what's there, the number representing how hard it would be, I think, to take that area were you to attack it. So I was a bit hesitant to make the attack because I wasn't sure I was supposed to make it anymore, like maybe the city was destroyed or something. I ended up doing it anyway because I just thought, well, we might as well. There's a kind of picture here, when you click on it, there's a picture of a building surrounded by a wall. So it's like, is that good? Is that the enemy building? Should we go there? Who knows? It's time to find out the hard way. We're going to deploy into combat once again. And check this out, it only takes me 5 seconds to deploy into combat. I'm quite literally getting good at this game, aren't I? The problem's going to come in the actual fight, because as mentioned before, I still don't know, or didn't know at this time, what I was supposed to be doing in these fights, both in the general sense and in terms of what the objective of this part of the game is. How do I get out of this screen? What is the win condition? I thought at first, I'll just stay where I deployed, because there's a choke point right in front of me, and I thought if these aliens are just going to attack me, I'll just stand here and just kill them as they come through the choke point, because as far as I know, your mechs have infinite ammo, so you can just keep killing them. It only just sort of dawned on me after a while that I guess the enemies were infinite as well, because after standing here for ages, they didn't stop coming. And there was another thing that was beginning to worry me, which is that my mechs were taking damage from something, and I couldn't tell what it was. I thought maybe it's an environmental hazard, but it was only affecting certain mechs. And what I think it was, I'm still of course not sure about this, is that your mechs do inflict friendly fire damage on each other. And because they tend to kind of bunch up, I guess they sometimes hit each other when they're firing. And that's that. So as you can see, we did lose one of the mechs, even though the aliens aren't getting anywhere close to us. We're absolutely dominating them in terms of what I think's happening in the battle. And my interpretation of what I'm seeing here is that we're winning big time. We are obliterating aliens by the tens of thousands with our infinite ammo machine guns, and things are fine. But it's actually going very badly, I think, judging by the fact our characters are dying. And I guess the point to make is, I don't know why what's happening is happening, and I think it might be friendly fire related. Maybe certain weapons do friendly fire damage. I know we have two kinds of weapons, I think, in play here. There's a rocket weapon. I can't see the rocket weapon firing on the screen, but if it was, maybe it's sometimes hitting ourselves or doing splash damage that is wide enough to hit ourselves, something like that. So that's not very good, I presume. For us, anyway. There's probably some way to get around this, but again, the lack of precise control about where your mechs stand could be an issue when it comes to getting around those problems. You can imagine that being frustrating. And I suppose the big thing to say about this battle system is that there's kind of not enough to it, I think. It feels like the game revolves around your ability to do this, because all that economy stuff you're doing out of the battle system is to make parts that you use in this battle system. So this is the main thing. But it's kind of not involved enough. I don't know, I felt like I wasn't doing very much in the couple of battles I took part in. I eventually, as you saw there, actually opened up the book mid-fight to be like, well, what am I even supposed to be doing? After I figured, well, killing the aliens isn't really progressing us towards victory, I guess, anyway. It turns out, it says in the book, it's like you must reach point B to win the battle. I don't know why that is the objective, but essentially you just have to move somewhere, and if you leave your guys on AI control, which they are now on, they will move to that point and allow you to win. So I was wasting my time by standing there in the beginning just killing off the aliens, thinking I'll clear the way while I have this tactical advantage of some kind. You just kind of have to run to the end. The aliens aren't that fast here, they can't really catch up to you very well, and you can kill them pretty easily. So I think just running in right away so that the fewest possible aliens spawn is the way to do it. Here was something that is actually good, I thought. There was a turret here which you can capture, which then fires at the stuff that's pursuing me. And I thought that was really neat. I could imagine something like that being a really fun thing to play with, especially if you could go out of your way to capture those turrets and do things a bit more tactically, make a decision regarding it. Well, ultimately, our AI takes us towards what I guess is point B, but there was a giant thing there, and it killed us, I don't know, within 2 seconds, and that was the end of that. So now what do I do? I'm sort of looking back on that like, well, I wonder what I would have done differently. What was I supposed to do? I could have just run in there real fast and maybe tanked the damage while I was still more alive. Is that what I was supposed to do? I don't know, it kind of feels like that wouldn't be much of a game if that is what you're supposed to do, so I'm just not sure about all of it. Well, anyway, the question now is, even if I was really loving that gameplay, I would still be a little bit worried about continuing because we just lost the vast majority of our stuff. Are we in a soft fail state? Here I'm looking at the production screen again because theoretically you can just make more mechs and overcome the loss of mechs. It's only that I don't understand what's going on this screen because of all of those little symbols saying no to the various things I think are in my production line. The point is, I don't know. Of course, people will say, but there was a way to know. You could have looked it up. And all I will say is, yeah, but at the time, when the thing I needed to know needed to be known, I didn't know it. I'm putting this responsibility on somebody else. And that responsibility can be as light as the game telling you to look it up. While I keep saying, like, I reject these people saying that I should go and look something up, if the game told me to do it, that would be the solution. We would have no problem whatsoever if the game itself said, please read this before playing, if it said, you have to watch this video before playing. And some difficult games do just say, we recommend you do this. Well, actually, most games give you a tutorial, but that's besides the point. In games that don't give you a tutorial, they sometimes will say, please read this book or something. And in that case, I would read the book. Because that's sort of in line with the principle. You're not going out of your way to sort of find extra information that isn't officially intended. Well, anyway, let's just go back to ranting, because we've basically seen the game as far as I saw it. Like, the stuff we saw there, that's everything I played in the game, so all of my impressions are based on just that. And you'll probably, if you're a fan of Mech Engineer, you might want to say your impressions are wrong, you should have done something else. And all I can say is, I know, but this is somebody else's problem. Like, I went in, I saw what I saw, and this is what I think about what I saw. It actually doesn't matter if in the future I would have changed my view, because what I saw was enough to kill the whole thing for me. So what I ended up doing, as we see here, is going on the Steam store page, because I was thinking, basically, am I just an idiot? Do I not get this at all? Or like, is anyone else having trouble playing Mech Engineer? And I was kind of happy to discover that people are complaining about it, as per my complaints in this video as well. And it's at about 70% on Steam, which isn't that good, and it seems to me that a lot of the complaints are probably about the UI and the UX. People just don't really understand it very much. There are also some complaints about like actual gameplay, like maybe the game itself isn't fun. Once you know how to use the UX and UI, you still don't have that much of a fun time, but other people do seem to enjoy it. And that seems to be the thing, where the positive reviews were like, it's really good, although you have to get around all of this stuff. And then the negative reviews were like, you have to get around all this stuff? That's bad. So the getting around the stuff is a key point in the game's design, and that's why I'm harking on about it so much. Everybody seems to be noticing that it's hard to play the game. Some people, and this is the thing that was annoying me and sort of spurred those rants earlier, will present that as a positive, and this guy here on the top right, Data Boy, is giving this view, which in my opinion is just so contradictory, and it annoys me. He says, follow the guides and you'll be fine. And then it says, it's for people who don't want a game that holds their hand. Do you understand that, like, you just said, follow a guide? So you're recommending hand-holding. in this game that you also claim is about not having your hand held. I don't know, you also recommended reading the manual, which in my opinion is the same thing. All of that information you're recommending that people need could have been in the game. It's just that you would have called that hand holding and been mad about it. And, well, I did this search here for hand because I was sensitive about that talking point. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't all over the place, so I couldn't grandstand over this like I wanted to. Although the review to the left also did mention the same point, saying it won't hold your hand, you're in for a challenge. And I just sort of perceive it differently, like the challenge doesn't come from the fact it's not holding your hand. That's the boring part. The challenge needs to be in the gameplay, because while making the game hard to understand technically is a kind of difficulty, I don't think it should be championed for being like that. It doesn't actually make the game hard, like, beyond the first hour. It's just making the first hour worse. Like, that's my view on it, essentially. And there's certainly something to be lost in not bothering to onboard players, and it seems to me that the people who liked the game just got through that. It wasn't really that they enjoyed getting through that, while some people are kind of claiming it. I think it's more like this guy, like, well, once you figure it out, there's a satisfying game behind this, implying that if you weren't in a state where you figured it out, it isn't a satisfying game, and I think that's the point that I'm trying to land on here. There's no point in making that early experience bad. Those who think that it being difficult to get into makes the game better are just mistaken in my opinion, or maybe we're all just talking about different things and I don't know. I remember stumbling upon the Stumblers review here, and I kind of thought what this guy wrote is essentially this video, but better written. So please read this guy's comment and then just forget whatever I said. I just agreed with this guy. Looks like he played it for about an hour, the same amount of time I played it for, and he was just like, well, there's not enough information or quality of life, so it was kind of hard to play, and I found it uninteresting as a result, and essentially that was me. Although you might also note he's framing this as a positive review just to be extra confusing, which I like to do as well. I like to make sure my points don't line up with my overall conclusion. So he's saying he recommends it, despite not playing it and giving the reasons why he didn't want to play it, because he thinks somebody else might like to play it. And I was like, this is exactly the sort of review that I like, and I actually bothered to upvote this guy's review. I think that's the first time I've ever upvoted a review on Steam, because I was like, this guy has somehow gotten through to me here with this negative feedback only, didn't even play the game, positive review. And I just felt some kinship with that. I'm like, yep, I'm happy to come to my final judgment on a game without even playing it, and to have my judgment be completely at odds with everything I say about the game. Stumbler, you're on to something here. So anyway, that was about that. I remember thinking there actually weren't many negative reviews highlighted here for a game that was only about 70% positive, but generally it seemed to be that people liked the concept, the theme, and they liked the gameplay that is in there, and people didn't like not being able to get to that gameplay. And there's an aspect of disappointment, which that review there mentioned very briefly. It's gone now. It said something like, I really wanted to like this game. And that was me from earlier as well, thinking the idea of this game, like the premise and where it initially seems to go, feels good. It feels like it's going to be special. It just isn't in practice because of really boring reasons, essentially. Like, it's stuff you would get over after an hour or two, and the people who gave the positive reviews with lots of playtime clearly did. They often mentioned, well, it was hard to get into, but, and then go on to say that the game is good. So there could be a good game hidden in here. And the thing that frustrates me is that, in my opinion, the difference between this game being good and bad is like 1% extra work from the developers. Like, if they'd thrown in that one line I was talking about earlier where it tells you how to deploy into battle so that some of the people had less of a bad time in the first 10 minutes, would that increase the game's score from 70% to 75% for 5 minutes work? Yes. This is my claim, this is my belief. And the thing to keep in mind is it's not very much work at all to make it easy to use. For example, they might have wanted it to say, drag your 4 mechs here to deploy into battle. There's one idea. Is that worth 5% score? Who knows, but I'm just sort of being hyperbolic to try and make some sort of vague point. I don't know what the Mech Engineer developers were really thinking when they did this, or whether they even think that the UI is bad, and it's coming as a surprise to them that people are saying it's bad in the reviews, and all these people are being like, it's so confusing, and then the developers are like, what do you mean it's so confusing? This was never supposed to be confusing. Or are they like, you idiots, you couldn't even get over the fact it was confusing? Like, we've written a manual somewhere, presumably. Like, you didn't even find it? I don't know. And I'd just be like, well, they are your paying customers. You have to kind of listen to what they're saying, don't you? I don't know, maybe. Like, if the people in the restaurant are annoyed that there are flies in their soup, you can't really just be like, yeah, but asking the waiter to get you a new soup was part of the soup eating experience that we intended. And it's like, okay. But clearly people didn't really think that was going to be the case. A couple of people love that they get to ask the waiter about replacing the soup, and then they eat the soup, and they're like, ha, I'm the best, I got the new soup. I don't. They like that in some way. They think that experience is worth cutting other people out. I don't know, maybe you think that as well. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but the ultimate point is that Mech Engineer drove me away, looks like it drove other people away as well, and to me, my guess is that it's just because it's hard to use. Then again, there was this grand overriding point I wanted to make, which is that maybe all of us talking about it being confusing, it's hard to use, steep learning curve, should have read the manual, everyone going on about all these things, are actually missing the point entirely. It's very late in this video to bring up a I'm missing the point entirely point, but I wanted to add this on because it's a nice palate cleanser that might refocus us. Does it matter how good the gameplay is? Yes, let's actually talk about the gameplay for a second, because my sort of vague philosophy is that when it comes to usability issues can be a red flag in that even products that have usability issues probably won't be dragged down by them if the product itself is good. To put it another way, if the gameplay is so good that people don't care about the UX, you wouldn't be getting negative reviews about the UX. So I'm sort of saying the negative UX review trend there is indicative that the gameplay isn't good enough, because the gameplay has the ability to make people not care about the UX. And I think that is evidenced to some extent in the positive reviews of the game, when, while they all seem to mention the UX as a feature, they're essentially saying it wasn't bad enough to stop them liking the game, and they liked it anyway. Or in some cases, that it is good, that it is bad, maybe, or at least they're implying that by being like, oh, you damn kids with your UX, that sort of view. And I think there is a general principle that is true, that you don't have to tell people to get good. You don't have to tell people to read the manual, you don't have to tell people to look at walkthroughs, you don't have to tell people to watch YouTube videos or do research or make them do any work whatsoever. If the game is so good, they will voluntarily do that without being told about it. And that's something to remember, I think. You don't have to tell people to get good at a game that they like, because they'll just do it, because they like the process that causes them to get good. And this is a sort of core game design thing. Would I be here complaining that I didn't understand how the battles worked if during this downtime, when I was just sitting here being confused the whole time, I was having loads of fun? I don't think I would complain. I would be thinking about the fun. I wouldn't be thinking about the confusion. It's possible for a game to actually have really bad UX and still be really good. That's the point I wanted to overwrite all of my previous contrary points with. If the game is of the sort where you sort of have to get into it, it's like an acquired taste, that is a red flag potentially anyway, because it's supposed to be a game. It's supposed to be like good from the beginning. It's supposed to be an entertainment product, as I put it before. People should like failing. You shouldn't get people complaining that they were failing, and well, ideally you shouldn't get people complaining they were failing because of the UI design. Like, I didn't see many people complaining about the actual difficulty or like the activities in the game. In fact, not many people seem to be talking much about that at all, which, I don't know, just seems like a bad thing. So while I'm making these like bold declarations, like if you did 5 minutes work, this game would shoot up to be a 10 out of 10, this may be completely false, just because I wouldn't be making this video at all if that first 5 minutes, if that first hour had been fun for a different reason, if the gameplay associated with the UX had been so good that I wasn't thinking like, damn, it was weird that the production menu doesn't make any sense. I'd be like, I'm so excited to make this thing. I know what I'm doing anyway, even though it's hard to do it in a sort of non-mechanical way. It's hard to do it in an annoying sense. I'm not annoyed by it on balance because of a gameplay consideration. I don't really have an example to show in Mech Engineer because, well, I suppose that is the example. That I don't have an example is my example of this point, to be extra confusing. There isn't a part of Mech Engineer where I was like, I'm so excited to see what's going to happen next that I don't care, that I don't really understand what's happening. I just want to plow on and like do some more gameplay, because I didn't really think the gameplay part was like a positive of the game. So we walk away with two completely, possibly contradictory comments on the game in this rant video. I guess they're not contradictory. A game can be bad and have bad UX, but that's even more damning. It doesn't appear to be that bad, because people who get through the UX seem to be claiming to enjoy the game, and that's why the game is getting some positive reviews. It just seems to be getting too many negative ones. Because I only looked at like 10 reviews, I don't know how many negative reviews are actually coming from the gameplay side of things. But from my perspective, I didn't find the gameplay good enough to deal with the UX. And to answer the comments that are probably on this video as well, I didn't find it good enough to invest time in like working on it. I didn't find it good enough to be like, I'll just fail 5 times in order to gain more experience, or to like, oh, I'll go and watch these videos, I'll read this book in order to gain experience, and then I'll find it fun. The fun had to start earlier to motivate me to do that. And as that guy was saying earlier, maybe it's because I'm too young or something. Old people prefer reading books about games and then playing it, according to some guy. I don't know. It seems to me the game might need to earn that work from me, if that work's going to be required. And this is a non-pejorative entitlement I'm claiming for myself. But before it seems too entitled, as I said earlier, the actual work I'm asking the game to do on my behalf is possibly as little as writing on the screen, please look up the answer to this question, something like that. That's UX instead of UI. This is user experience. If you think users will have a negative experience from not looking at your manual, then you do have to tell them to look at it. If they just think the players should have done more preparations unprompted, okay, but I think that's a problem with the judgment of the developers rather than necessarily a problem you need to place on the players. Like, this is entertainment software, it's not corporate software, the thing that I'm from, where like user error is a decent excuse for something going wrong. In entertainment, you shouldn't be allowing user errors to cause them to have unfun experiences that you did not intend. Or, as ranted about earlier, maybe you did intend for all of that and all of this is a moot point anyway. But you just also have to accept the criticism and the possible negative reviews of locking the door to your art gallery and such when all of the painting fans come by, and I guess they actually were more interested in the paintings than the whole locked door mystery thing. I think just blaming the developers for everything is a safe scapegoat, isn't it? Because ultimately, they are the gods of this program. They can make it do anything they want, and with that power comes the responsibility to control the experience of people using it to a small extent anyway. And that very small extent might just be putting 5 words on the title screen, such as, please read the manual first. Is that 5 words? Please read the manual first. What a guess! Got it right in one. Clearly I am a UX master after all. I had a miserable time with Mech Engineer, it has to be said. Maybe I've managed to touch on some of the reasons that could be behind that during this video. And highlighting the misery was that after, well, playing Final Fantasy XIV, then playing this, in the same session, I was like, I don't know, so like downtrodden. I was like, I have to play a real game. I have to find a game that I think would be good. And I tried to stick with this kind of old school idea. I was like, I'm going to play an old game and compare it to this. I started playing Command & Conquer Remastered, which is not as old themed as this, but within the first 2 minutes, I was like, oh right, this is what fun feels like. And after that I was like, okay, I definitely didn't have fun with Mech Engineer because it's a completely different feeling to play a more sort of crafted game that has its own bundle of UI problems and modernization issues and things, but it's intended to be fun from the very beginning. It's a sort of different style of game making, and I was like, okay, this feels more normal to me. We're back in the business of like having fun. I could play this for 20 minutes and have fun the whole time. Maybe that's more of the game for me. So let me know if this, Mech Engineer, is the game for you and your different perspectives, because clearly those people exist. They were on that thing I was just looking at on the review pages. Let's get out of here. Thanks for watching.